I'll let you take it away, Bob, and do your introduction, and we can get going.
All right. Okay, that's bouncing around. Okay. Well, I think the first one is a little appropriate. I think everybody has sat back every few days and go, okay, what's next? What's going on? Anyway, welcome Monday morning. Hope everybody's had a coffee or two. Brains are all working, or at least you're prepared to pretend you're listening. All right. So what I want to go over are items that were in the this month's uh, report, which is the new face of global trade. Take a look at a risk analysis and building strategies and some of the untapped strengths within a company that you may not think about because they've always been there. You just haven't made them the focal point. But a little first on to what's in the monthly report. And uh, talking is external data isn't just extra, it's a competitive edge when using wisely. And what the numbers are and the front end and verbiage in the front end of the report is internal metrics for revenue profits offer a narrow lens to gain a fuller picture. External data is essential. And what it is I'm sure everybody would like to have data and sales on a SKU level and so forth. That is rather difficult to obtain these days with so much of the online sales and e-commerce, because e-commerce people don't tend to share information, particularly Amazon. But it gives you a broader, I feel, idea of what's going on in the market and other things that can be tied together. So on the economic side, of course, FX rates, which affect everyone to some degree, fuel costs, earnings, consumer prices, transportation, manufacturing, raw materials, industrial rents. And one of them is transportation is an all-in cost where the fuel cost is simply what the cost of diesel is. And then break down into the segments of sales by retail, wholesale, some wholesale inventories, and imports by product groups. If you're looking for other information, please contact me. I can see if it's available. And if it is, I will provide it. If it isn't, I'll at least say what's the closest piece of information. Also in there are economic summaries, foreign exchange. And the US dollar weakened sharply. It's the worst start since 1973 for the US dollar exchange rate. The Canadian dollar rose 3.5% in the Q2 in 2025. Now the caution is this is being driven by politics, political sentiment, rather than economic fundamentals. And economists will all tell you that in the long run, the economics will prevail. I think that's one way they keep their job, because they were certainly not forecasting this kind of change in exchange rates. So it's very cautionary. The euro has appreciated 5%, and as Michael and I were talking, they expect it to appreciate even more after the announcement yesterday of a trade deal with the EU, which kind of makes you scratch your head about that. So if the exchange rate moves even more, European goods are going to be rather a lot more expensive in the US if the euro keeps going up. Construction affects pretty much everything in our lives, particularly housing. So building permits declined, it said, by 829 million. Well, that's year over year. Right. So in a way, not only is saying, oh, that's not good, which of course is true, but the other point is that what was going on last year? We had a number of very large construction projects, particularly in BC, and a number of commercial, municipal, and so forth construction. So month to month, looking at a different month doesn't always tell you a lot about what's happening today, but it is different from last year. Right. That's just a piece of it. And as Michael and I tend to talk about, we get into a lot of these trade deals. So look at the new phase of global trade, strategic, not free. And this is what I kind of laugh at, is that every time they announce it, they're going, oh, they've agreed to a 15% free trade agreement. Well, 15% isn't free. So you might as well drop that free part of it and start looking, calling it what it is. It's just basically a trade agreement. Now, we'll get into, in a couple of slides, get into this makeup and how the World Trade Organization will look at it. But what it is I'm looking at is general tariffs and quotas. Countries will set high general tariffs, let's say 50%, and then set quotas based on products, industry, input products, or national interest. And why that high 50% is that what you can do is you can come down from there, you can't go up. And 50% is usually looked at as being a no-go rate. You're going to do little or no trade at a 50% tariff. And current free trade agreements and new agreements will reflect this reality. Okay. I actually did this slide about a week and a half ago. There will be no blanket free trade with zero tariffs and no quotas. Right? And military, economic, health security will play a crucial role. When you look at health, think about pharmaceuticals. Right? Now, non-tariff trade barriers, basically dumping, is the fair market price will govern all trade. And dumping, well, almost everybody understands that, is when goods are sold below market value to undercut competitors. There are 2 or 3 different ways to calculate that under the World Trade Organization. It can be internal to the country. It can be a third country that they're looking at, and so forth. But they're pretty lax in enforcing this dumping piece and the calculation. Now, what I'm using here for an example is the steel. Canada came out and announced that they are going to come out with some steel, their trade policy. And what the trade policy is, steel products from non-trade agreement partners, which include China and Turkey, will see their tariff rate quota tighten to half of 2024. right? And a 50% tariff will impose on any imports beyond those levels. And those mechanics are quite interesting, because that's where that 50% comes in. So you can say, we're going to charge everybody 50%, but you can do a trade agreement based on quotas at a lower rate. Right? But also this relatively new policy in July 16, trade partners who do have trade agreements with Canada, other than US and Mexico, which was under negotiation, 50% tariff will apply to imports surpassing 2024 volumes. So they can't increase those volumes. Now, there's a couple of things from there, and I may be getting ahead of myself in my slides, is that when there is a quota, such as the 2024, you have to get in and get an import license, all right? Which is how they track, or the government tracks what they're in, because it's 2024 volumes globally, all right? When there was no quotas, there was no reason for you to go in and get a import license, because there were no restrictions. But now, if the restrictions is, let's say, the same volume as 2024, then you're going to have to get in early. And well, a lot of Canadians don't have much experience with this, unless you're in milk or chickens or eggs or something like that. But there's a window usually when to get an import license, and there's a window to go in and fill out all the forms and go into the government and get your quota. Dairy products, of course, is one. I ran into this quite a bit when I was in Korea. Everything needed a import license, regardless, okay, of what the quotas were. But it was fairly time consuming, and there was a lot of forms. Yeah. And of course, the third part is with anti-dumping, which is an additional tariff to 25% on imports from all, it says, non-US countries. That's just because we're in negotiations, containing steel melted down and poured in China. I'm not quite sure how you actually control that, but that's on the dumping. So 3 pieces. There'll be a tariff, a quota, and then you will look at anti-dumping, which is key to each country. So under the World Trade Organization, and we were talking before and saying what Trump said and so forth, but this is kind of the vernacular they use in US trade, is how the WTO, okay, a most favored nation tariff, which is the context of international trade, means that a country grants the same tariff rate to all other countries that are members of the World Trade Organization. And there are 160 countries. Unless a preferential trade agreement, like a free trade agreement, exists. This is to ensure non-discrimination and equal treatment among trade partners. So you can see where Canada has put out this thing on steel, is they put it, okay, the most favored nation is 50%, unless you have a trade agreement with us. Okay, then we can lower it and we can add quotas onto it. Right? So it's kind of that drop down. Okay, now quotas, specific tariff trade quotas, are a mechanism used to regulate the quantity of goods that can be imported at a lower tariff rate. Okay, not a higher tariff rate. You can say everything's free except and you can only do that with the anti-dumping and so forth, while still allowing for unlimited imports at a higher tariff rate. Okay, that is the essence of the WTO. So in Canada, most favored nation, most favored nation would be 50%, and the quotas with a trade agreement. With a trade agreement, 100% of 2024. Without the trade agreement, 50% of 2024. If you're looking at it, I haven't gone through it. Maybe I should, but here are the current Canada Border Services regulations, export and import permits, which may well become a part of your daily activities if you're importing or exporting, of course. Exporting, I don't know of many limits. It's mostly military or security. But anyway, those are the two pieces I wanted to say. And import permits, as I said, is take a look at it. So all of this was on, and I always like to take a step back and look at it and say, okay, what's the theory behind that? And the theory of what we had before on the free trade is based on a comparative advantage. But free trade didn't fail because the theory was wrong. It failed because real world complexity, like inequality, okay, which means some countries really don't have a comparative advantage. They don't have the raw materials and so forth. All they had, and particularly the third world, was that they had low wages. Well, unfortunately, what that does in free trade, it keeps them having low wages. Right? So didn't help the people it was supposed to help. Misguided assumptions. They assumed that if you didn't have a comparative advantage, everybody in that country would retrain and get involved in another industry. Not so much. Poor adjustments. A lot of countries just threw in subsidies to support industries that were not economical and did not have any advantage in world trade. And of course, then you came into geopolitical tensions and so forth and who you would deal with. So free trade was really an interesting and kind of forward thinking in many ways, but it didn't work that well because benefits were real if they followed that, but the costs were a lot deeper, and countries that had continued to subsidize businesses that shouldn't be there. And then you had China, and first of all, Japan and Korea, and then China, who basically through government intervention kept and developed industries that they had no advantage in at the time. And of course, there's always politicians found an easy scapegoat in foreign competition. So anyway, it's kind of, you scratch your head and say, yeah. Now, I just wanted to throw in here is kind of a quick update. And what I was saying earlier is we're looking at the EU, but there is a whole, basically three different items that are somewhat are consistent. These things include cars, but cars will have a 10 or 15% add-on. So it's giving autos made in the US about a 15% advantage on there. Remember, I said is if the exchange rate, particularly the EU, starts to move, that could be more than 15% to current costs. They all exclude steel and aluminum. Pharmaceuticals are a question mark because what they have set down is it depends on supply chain security requirements, which the US have stated in these agreements. And the supply chain security requirements have not been defined. We can kind of guess at it, but I'm guessing it's going to be somewhat, if it's opened at all, it'll be a quota system and allow the US to build their pharmaceutical industry. The other key point in these three of the big one is the buying U.S. energy products, both in Japan and in the EU, which could be looked at as taking a direct shot at Canada. The U.S. exports a lot of LNG. Canada has just started on the West Coast. But of course, they want to do more than that. I'm not quite sure why, because certainly both Europe and Japan and all other Asian countries want to buy more and more LNG. And all of them, well, the EU and the Japan have an investment targets, 550 billion, 600 billion. But they're corporate investments, and neither group have the power in their government, of course, to force a corporation to invest overseas. Some have already talked about their intentions to do so, but they may be dragging their heels quite a bit. The one other one is interesting is in the EU is energy products and arms. That in itself, I think, is the European and Canadian buildup in military. Lots of talk about buying European military equipment rather than US, and I think US wants to make sure they get a big piece of that pie. Now, I guess on one of the final ones on the EU is the deal. And if you remember, Canada negotiating their deal with Europe is that it will need to be signed off by all 27 members of the EU. And each of them having different interesting and levels of reliance on the export of goods to the US. I recall when following the Canadian EU trade agreement that there was one region in Belgium who was against some agricultural product, and it held it up for months and months, this small section, and because Belgium had some agreement that all regions would have to agree before the central government could sign off, and then they'd have to sign off before the EU could sign off. So extremely long process. The other one is non-tariff barriers, particularly on cars, and that could be a big problem. Japan, for example, have very strict emissions and motor size, which is American cars are known for their powerful motors, and they're they're restricted to size on them. The other big thing is aluminum, and still questioning if they're keeping 50% on virtually. The EU produces a lot of aluminum out of Norway, Sweden, Scandinavian countries, and so forth, who have the power to produce it. But the US imports 47% of their aluminum. So if they're restricting everybody at a 50% tariff, where are they getting it? Are they prepared to pay that much? Anyway, There's still a long list of countries. Everybody's looking at China at August 1st, but there are huge countries. There's stuff people are talking about. There may be a 90-day extension to the trade war truce with China before August 1st, but who knows? Anyway, quickly going back, this is a slide from last month. We're just looking at Canada. One of the big things that everybody, I think, was talking about, and they were last week at the provincial premiers meetings, is setting up an LNG in Hudson Bay. But you can see how the U.S. is trying to jumpstart that, and tying up Europe and buying LNG, because from one of the ports, Churchill, in fact, you can move it 7 months a year, and it's only a 2-week ship ride to Europe. So that was a key one there. The interesting one is the LNG on the West Coast. Is the LNG operation in British Columbia is actually owned by the gas companies in Japan, China, and Malaysia. So it's not owned by the Canadian government. It's not owned by Canadian. It's owned by those three gas companies who are and in their own country. So they're buying from themselves in effect. So anyway, there's a lot of pieces. We went through the June report there. Certainly Canada, and it's funny, we've been talking, and it's almost resetting your mind when you talk about comparative advantages. At Canada, we've been all talking, oh, we need to build manufacturing. So our comparative advantage is raw materials and energy. So kind of let's get on with it and get our advantages going. What I had in the report as well was audit and align your supply chain. But what it is more of just doing an audit and going through all the products and processes and look at dependency, identify where you're over reliant on the US or single country import. It's, it'd be nice if you sat there and say, here's this product, and I'm going to go out and buy it from somebody else and so forth, and jump on a plane and so forth. But I always thought is just kind of pull back and do an audit and look at what the risks are, just to identify and then prioritize what you can do. You will probably be seeing a lot of government-sponsored mission and trade offices and so forth going through. But there's one other slide I want to take a look at, and look at local sourcing partner, servicing, and services, which may be just labeling, adding some of the value, some value onto the product by doing different ways of labeling and boxing and so forth in Canada. Here is seizing, and this is a big one, and I've been playing with this chart a few times, is interprovincial, is that stay ahead of the regulation harmonization. But I think what you'll find is a lot of that will be very common with other international certifications. So if you're going to change some aspects of the product for interprovincial or for European, is do it in a way that it complies with everything. So you can import products as well, and they comply under all the interprovincial or what the standardization is they're working on. trade missions are big, and I'll get at that in a minute. And of course, defense infrastructure, joint supply chains. Look up what the buy and sell is when you're looking at defense. I have a nephew who's in the military, and he's going into Borden, and they have which is just north of Ottawa, if you don't know, and they have about $1.5 billion just on infrastructure within Borden itself. And they need everything, pens and pencils included. Be a big buy on there. So there are a lot of bits and pieces in there. In there, we're looking at the bit of the audit on the audit is when you look at most favored nations, is looking at, and when you're bringing it in, is countries with trade agreements, without trade agreements. Okay. So going through the product list that products by groupings, and HS codes both 4, 6, and 10 would be an interesting way to stratify it, and then look at it so that if something pops up, and I'm sure there's going to be adjustments for months, years, maybe, is that you can identify those products quite quickly that may be affected. As I said before, study import permits, how the mechanics, how they work, and what the requirements are. And the other one, which is understand your own strength. Because what you're doing, what's happening, right now, you have current most favored nation. The average tariff that is actually paid, and that includes all the dumping charges against China, is only 4%. So that's an average. All right. But you may have almost ignored if there was a quota, because the tariff was so low, it was basically immaterial, but it will no longer be immaterial. And you will need to have an import permit. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of new regulations coming out on that, of how you get in and apply for those permits. All right. If I haven't talked about it before, is I've spent quite a bit of time of my career in Asia. It's Canada is very rich in this. Okay. But language and culture matters if you're going into it. And you can probably sit around and look at your own company and find people with all sorts of language and cultural background that can help. Okay. And it really is important, because no matter, people say business is business, business is personal when you're sitting down and doing a deal, no matter what. I had a number of people looking at it. Is in Korea, where I lived, as well as Singapore, is the business card itself is important, because they have a very standard level of what your level in the company is, and they'll flip it over, and that depends how low they're going to bow when they meet you. Get it wrong and you'll all be bowing there for about an hour trying to figure out what it is. Knowledge of products from a global perspective. I have there is a eel skin briefcases, which used to be a real in piece, real luxury goods. And I had a Canadian who knew the tanning industry, and he just grabbed hold of this industry just because he knew tanning, but he had done most of his work in Morocco. He saw this and made a fortune. All right. These things were something like, he was buying them for about $40, and they were selling at jewelry stores here for 500. So but it's because he knew the industry, what it cost to tan, where he could get the eel skins, and how he could get them tan. And your suppliers and their relationship here in Canada, a number of people stay within their industry. But what I found working in Asia, they don't stay within their industry, they stay within their friends group and their business group. So you may be buying from somebody and you may be looking for another product, but their friend group are importers and exporters, and they have the contacts. And if you have a good relationship, just ask them a question, because they love to trade in favors. So they do you a favor, you do them a favor, and you keep going. Um, I could go on in some of the pieces, and it really gets extraordinary after a while of how they'll work with each other. Uh, this was on the parent and company, is turn the table on the parents. When I was working in Asia, my partners were our branch in New York and our branch in London, England. We rarely talked to our head office in Toronto. It was just the way it was. So if you're looking at it and ask questions, you can probably find within your company or a foreign subsidiary somebody who has the contact and knowledge that you're looking for. And of course, I'm kind of doing myself a little thing, is ask the white-haired old guy who's been around for a while, and ask him, why don't we do this? And he'll explain to you what the pain was when they last tried to make these changes. But these strengths that are within a company with experience, contacts, and so forth can be expanded and extremely valuable. Uh, I guess one of my last is importers become exporters. Is if you're an importer and you do some traveling and buying, is make some contact with Canadian exporters, particularly small and medium-sized exporters. Many of them know how to manufacture, but they don't know international markets. They don't know foreign exchange, financing goods, and so forth. So you could, in many ways, uh, add a different size to it. And all of a sudden, people are helping each other, and you can share in different resources and so forth. Right? And the big one is travel. I always looked at um, the story. I talked to somebody in when I was overseas, and those little packets of Remian noodles, and they were buying them for 25 cents from a Canadian supplier and selling them for $2 or $3 in Japan, after they slapped on a label. I went and contacted the supplier in Canada and asked him. I said, "How's your business?" And he goes, "It's going great." And I said, "Well, um, have you ever been to Asia?" He goes, "No, but I make a lot of money." He was making a lot of money, but the guy was adding 400% easily onto something, didn't weigh anything. There's a little packet of noodles. So I guess my little symbol here is travel. You'll never know what you find. So I had a bunch of different other pieces. You get into people, some companies that switch around. If you've seen like Lavazza, the coffee, Italian coffee, they started off importing coffee beans. Then they started mixing coffee beans, and people liked it. They now export, okay, to 90 countries. They started importing coffee beans only about, I think it was 40 years ago. And now they're one of the biggest exporters out of Europe of coffee. You never know what can change. Uh, Huawei used to start off importing telecom equipment, and then got some local builders and manufacturers and so forth, and now is one of the biggest exporters of telecom equipment. So it's kind of those pieces. If you look at both sides, it gives you a big advantage onto your own business and possible future. So anyway, where are we right now? Well, we're pretty well there. Questions. I'm kind of wanted to give a bit of an update and a bit of a look at the pieces that are coming together. I hope I'll probably be moving off some of this trade information, which I've been on for, I guess, the last 2 or 3 months in the reports. But if you want more information, you have any questions or comments, you can contact me here, or you can contact Michael or Sam, and we'll try and put those pieces together for you. Anyway, any questions? Am I kind of going too slow or too fast, or?
You just have too much knowledge, Bob, and it overwhelms us.
No, no. Everybody has that. What I like to do is just join the dots and say, yeah, that's the same as that over here, and that's the same as that over here. There's not a lot new here, you know. So
I know in the June report, I think you included a page which had a bunch of links to government, both provincial and federal
yeah,
quoting bids, and that you can go take a look at.
yeah, we did that, and it could be interesting. And that's kind of the thing is you click on it has government sites, but it's something like what I said is certification. You can go on, and every province has one, the federal government has one. But one of the first things is you have to register. Okay. And the register can be a while. You may see something there and say, oh, well, here's this contract available for X. But if you're not registered, you're going to spend a week or 10 days just playing around, trying to get registered, not applying for that contract. Okay. So that's the same thing as a certification. And if you have somebody and they understand how you go about applying these, and the government is black and white. I worked in strategic sourcing for a large Canadian bank, and I had to first of all go, listen, guys, um, I can choose anybody I want. Okay. Uh, but in when they put out the RFA and the government, you got to hit all the marks or you get eliminated in the first round. All right. So having those bits and pieces of information is key. And certifications. Are you certified or not? Environmental things are usually pluses. So you'll get ranked from 1 to 10, but you'll get a plus or something if you have a better environmental policy and so forth.
So yeah, I think those who weren't on the call last week, Bob really got into some of the big projects that are expected to be coming down the pipe in regards to infrastructure and military. So there may be opportunities within both our industries here to get some new business possibly. So
Yeah, it was huge. When you're looking at having thousands and thousands of workers working on a project, you can just imagine what it is. And I think I gave the example where, you know, if you have 7,000 workers fairly remote, and you have to do housing and you have to do food and you have to do what
entertainment.
don't you have to do?
So I don't know if you got any comments regarding what you're seeing in the Canadian economy that's coming, Bob. I think
Lots of politics really obscuring it. And I guess I shouldn't say that because economics is a large part of the report, but basic economics really isn't playing a lot. It's politics, it's trust, it's confidence, it's all those things that are really affecting the economy. and how much people spend. It'll be an interesting few days. It feels, I feel like maybe Carney's sitting there like a poker player going, okay, who's going to blink first? Strange, like I said, in the aluminum is, so if you've eliminated all the what people you've done trade agreements with for getting aluminum, where are you going to get it? We may be the last store open that he can do a deal for bringing in aluminum without a 50% surcharge.
Yeah.
So,
So yeah, like I say, we record these sessions. If you want a copy of the slide deck, you can reach out to myself. But we also post them on both websites on the resource library page, which does require a password. So you just make a request and I'll send you the password. But you can go on, you can see all the past webinars you can download or get a link to. You can get any past reports or copies of the slide decks as well. So we post them all on both websites, COPA and CHPTAs. Any other questions from the group here?
and really, come out to me, R. Smith, CHPTA, ask me a question, ask me if I have any information on something, and I'll let you know, or I'll let you know I can find it, or sorry, it doesn't exist. I can't, don't have it.
Yeah, I know in the past you used to do those either 6 month or annual import reports. Are you still planning to do that, Bob, or are you just concentrating on the monthly reports now?
Yeah, I'll have to negotiate with Sam. Right now, he's keeping me busy
That's true.
going in there. But there are, I have a few resources where you contact, and some of them are as importers. There is an importers database out there, and I have kind of write up on how to get there. And it's interesting because you can, when I've shown it to some people and sent them the instructions of how to do a search on it, is they find competitors they never knew about before. Oh, I didn't know those guys did that. Well, they're importing the parts. They must be putting them together.
Yeah, there's a lot of valuable information. Obviously, it depends sort of how specific you can get for a certain product category, but some are better
Yeah.
than others as far as how deep you can go.
Yeah, basically as deep as we can go is on imports, which is a 10-digit code, HS code. Exports is only at the 6-digit level, but on the 10-digit, and depending what the government wants, because 10-digit is a national, like Canada sets up their own 10-digit, which are harmonized with the US and Mexico because of trade agreements. But some of them get quite, they, when I was doing it for COPA, you could bring in, they broke pins down into fine tip from ballpoint, from this and the rest. And that was quite a bit of detail.
Yeah. So as I say, if you're ever looking for some information on imports, just reach out to Bob, and in his spare time, he may be able to pull some information together for you. But
Yeah.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us today, and thanks, Bob, for all your hard work that you put into the report and these presentations. So hopefully we'll see you guys next month, and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks,
Cheers,
Bob.
everybody.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, guys.